They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sitting in that conference room, watching Derek Vaughan dismiss 12 years of my work as something an intern could handle, I realized revenge isn't about temperature, it's about timing. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I simply placed my badge on the table and walked out, knowing that in 36 hours, the $200 million government contracts I'd kept alive would flatline, not because I'd sabotaged them, but because they'd just fired the only person who knew how to keep the heart beating. My name is Emily Carter, and for 12 years, I was the ghost in NovaCore Systems' machine, the one nobody saw but everyone depended on. At 38, I'd spent a third of my life in the fluorescent-lit maze of our Denver office, nursing a proprietary compliance system that kept over $200 million in federal contracts flowing like clockwork. Most people thought I just pushed buttons and ran diagnostics. They had no idea I was performing daily surgeries on a digital heart that would flatline the moment I stopped monitoring its rhythm. NovaCore wasn't glamorous. We didn't make apps that changed the world, or gadgets that made headlines. We built the boring stuff data infrastructure for government agencies, the digital plumbing that nobody thinks about until it backs up. Our building sat like a gray concrete block in the Denver Tech Center, surrounded by startups with ping-pong tables and kombucha on tap. We had vending machines from 1987 and coffee that tasted like disappointment, but we had something those startups didn't: contracts with three-letter agencies that paid on time. Every time. I'd started as a junior systems analyst when the company was 40 people crammed into a warehouse. Now we had 300 employees across 4 floors, and I knew every server, every protocol, every line of legacy code that held our house of cards together. The old-timers called me the Keeper, partly a joke, partly reverence. They knew what I knew: our entire federal compliance framework was built on a system so archaic and convoluted that even our original vendor had thrown up their hands and walked away. I'd rewritten it from scratch, piece by piece, while keeping it running, like performing brain surgery on a patient who couldn't be put under anesthesia. The compliance system wasn't just software, it was a living thing with moods and quirks. It required daily offerings of authentication tokens, security certificates that expired at seemingly random intervals, and a custodian role that had to be physically present in our secure facility at least once every 72 hours to maintain federal authorization. I was that custodian. The only one. HR knew it, legal knew it, but somewhere between the 5th and 6th floor, that knowledge evaporated into corporate amnesia. My workspace reflected my role: a corner desk buried under 3 monitors, sticky notes in 4 colors: yellow for urgent, pink for federal deadlines, green for system maintenance, blue for everything else, and a collection of stress balls shaped like servers that IT had given me over the years. My coffee mug read, "I void warranties," a gift from the late-night crew who'd witnessed me work miracles with duct tape and determination. The walls of my cube were covered in network diagrams that looked like subway maps designed by someone on hallucinogens. Each line represented a data flow, each junction a critical compliance checkpoint. To anyone else, it was nonsense. To me, it was a symphony I'd been conducting for over a decade. I knew which servers ran hot, which databases needed gentle coaxing after updates, which authentication protocols would throw tantrums if you looked at them wrong. But here's the thing about being indispensable: it only works if the people above you understand what you do. And in corporate America, understanding is often the first casualty of a reorganization. That's how Derek Vaughan entered my life, riding in on a wave of operational efficiency and resource optimization, armed with an MBA and the kind of confidence that only comes from never having touched a production system. The day before everything went to hell, I'd spent 14 hours tracking down a certificate error that was threatening to lock us out of a Department of Defense procurement portal. Nobody knew. Nobody thanked me. But $200 million kept flowing, and that night, I drove home through Denver's suburbs, thinking I'd won another invisible battle in an invisible war. I should have seen the signs. The closed-door meetings that suddenly didn't include me, the way my manager started avoiding eye contact, the new faces from consulting firms measuring our workspace like they were planning where to put the body. But when you're keeping the lights on, you don't always notice the shadows growing longer. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, already a bad sign. Real meetings happened at 9 or 2. 10:30 meant someone wanted an audience for their performance. Derek Vaughn strutted into conference room A like he owned the air we were breathing. 40 years old, silver temples strategically maintained, suit that cost more than my monthly mortgage. His LinkedIn profile, which I'd stalked the night before, was a masterpiece of corporate buzzword bingo transformational leader. Change catalyst, digital innovation evangelist. Translation, he'd never written a line of code in his life. Good morning, team. His voice had that TED Talk quality rehearsed enthusiasm with a hint of condescension. I'm thrilled to be leading NovaCore's infrastructure division into the future. We're going to revolutionize how we approach systems management. I sat in the back, nursing my third coffee, watching him click through slides filled with circles and arrows that meant nothing. Synergy, optimization, paradigm shifts, the usual suspects. Then he got to slide 15, eliminating redundancies. We've identified several legacy roles that no longer align with our forward-thinking strategy, he said, laser pointer dancing across an org chart where my position had been marked with a red X. For example, our current system's maintenance structure is unnecessarily complex. What Emily here does, he pointed directly at me, and 30 heads swiveled in unison. Could easily be handled by entry-level staff or even automated. We're not in the Stone Age anymore, people. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of concentration, but the awkward silence of witnessing a public execution. Sarah from Network Security caught my eye, her face a mixture of horror and disbelief. Tom from Database Management actually gasped. They knew, the ones who worked nights and weekends, who'd seen me pull off miracles with spit and prayers, they knew what Derek had just done. In fact, Derek continued, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room like static electricity. I've already brought in Marcus here. He gestured to a 20-something kid in an ill-fitting polo. Fresh from his internship at Microsoft, he'll be taking over systems maintenance starting immediately. Marcus gave a little wave. Poor kid had no idea. He'd just been handed a lit stick of dynamite. Emily, Derek's voice cut through my thoughts like a dull blade. You'll spend the next 2 days documenting your processes for Marcus. Try to keep it simple. We don't need a novel. 2 days. 12 years reduced to 2 days of knowledge transfer. I could have laughed. I could have screamed. I could have stood up and explained that the federal compliance system required biometric authentication tied to a specific custodian role, that the authentication tokens were hard-coded to my security profile after a 2019 breach, that changing custodians required a 90-day federal review process that we couldn't afford to fail. Instead, I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I walked to the front, my sneakers squeaking against the polished floor I'd given up heels years ago when I realized I'd be crawling under server racks more often than attending board meetings. Derek smirked, probably thinking I was about to beg or plead or make a scene that would justify his decision. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge, the little piece of plastic that held more power than Derek could imagine. The master key to a kingdom he didn't even know existed. I placed it on the conference table with a soft click that somehow echoed in the silence. No need for 2 days, I said, my voice steady as a flatline. Marcus can start now. Derek's smirk widened. That's the spirit C. Everyone, this is how professionals handle transition. Emily understands that we're moving toward a more efficient. I was already walking toward the door. Behind me, I heard Sarah whisper, Holy shit. Tom's chair scraped against the floor. He knew what that badge meant. The real IT people. The ones who lived in the trenches. They were already doing the math. 72 hours until the first authentication cycle. 36 hours until the system would start looking for its custodian. 24 hours until the warnings began. Emily, Derek called after me, irritation creeping into his showman's voice. We'll need your documentation. The door closed behind me with a soft, pneumatic hiss. In the hallway, fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune, the same hallway I'd walked for 12 years, past the same motivational posters and dying plants, but this time, I wasn't coming back. My desk was already boxed up. They'd done it while I was in the meeting. Efficient, professional, stone cold. Security was waiting with a cardboard box and a clipboard. Standard procedure. I signed the papers without reading them, packed my I void warranties mug, and left the stress balls for whoever came next. they'd need them. The security guard escorted me to my car like I was a criminal who might steal staplers on the way out. 20 minutes from conference room to parking lot, the fastest exit interview in NovaCore history. As I sat in my Honda Civic, cardboard box in the passenger seat, I didn't feel anger. I felt something far more dangerous: clarity. I drove home through Denver traffic on autopilot, but my mind was sharp as broken glass. The federal compliance system wasn't just software, it was a living contract with the United States government. Every transaction, every data packet, every authentication request required a validated custodian signature, not a role, not a position, a person. Me, Emily Carter, Employee ID 10847, Custodian Registration AFED 2019, CTR 5847. The irony was beautiful in its stupidity. Derek thought he was cutting fat, eliminating redundancy. He didn't know he'd just performed a lobotomy on his own company. I pulled into my driveway at 2:15 p.m., 3 hours before I'd normally even think about leaving. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was watering her roses and gave me a concerned look. "Early day, hun." "Career change," I said, and her face did that thing people's faces do when they don't know if you're joking or having a breakdown. Inside my house, a modest ranch I'd bought 5 years ago when NovaCore stock was actually worth something, I set up my laptop at the kitchen table. Not to sabotage, not to hack, not to destroy, to document. But not for them, for me. I logged into my personal cloud storage, the one I'd been maintaining for years. Every email where I'd warned management about the custodian requirement, every meeting note where I'd explained the federal authentication process, every declined budget request for a backup custodian. Cover your ass 101. The first lesson you learn in corporate IT. The system architecture documents were already there, uploaded monthly as part of my personal backup routine, technically against company policy, but then again, so was having a single point of failure for $200 million in federal contracts. I'd learned long ago that covering your ass meant keeping receipts, and I had 12 years of receipts. At 3:45 p.m., my phone buzzed. Tom from database. "Emily, what the hell? They're saying you quit?" Then Sarah. "The badge, Emily. The badge. Do they know?" Then a number I didn't recognize. Probably Marcus. "Hi, Ms. Carter. Derek said you'd be sending documentation. I'm at your desk, but can't find anything." I turned off my phone. The next step required precision. I opened my secure laptop, the one NovaCore had issued specifically for federal compliance work. It was biometrically locked, encrypted, and tracked every keystroke. Perfect. I logged in one final time. Navigating to the custodian portal, everything was green. Systems operational, contracts flowing, authentication valid for another 68 hours, 14 minutes, and 37 seconds. I initiated a proper custodian transition request by the book, following every federal guideline. The system responded immediately. Custodian transition initiated. Current custodian Carter. Emily Fed, 2019, CTR 5847. New custodian pending designation. Warning system will enter limited operation mode in 3600. If no qualified custodian is designated, federal contracts will be suspended after 72 without valid custodian authentication. The beautiful thing about government systems is they don't care about your corporate restructuring. They don't care about your efficiency initiatives or your paradigm shifts. They care about compliance, and compliance requires a custodian. I documented every step, every screenshot, every warning message. Then I composed a single email to legal, CCing HR and the CFO, notably excluding Derek. As of 2:15 p.m. today, I am no longer an employee of NovaCore Systems. Per Federal Regulation 478.3b, I have initiated standard custodian transition protocols for all government contracts. The system will require new custodian designation within 36 hours to maintain operational status. Documentation for the designation process is available in the Federal Compliance Manual, Section 12, which requires 90-day advance notice for custodian changes. Good luck. Send. Then I did something I hadn't done in 12 years. I closed the laptop during business hours and walked away. No guilt, no second thoughts, no looking back. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on my back porch, watching the sun paint the Rockies gold. Somewhere in that gray concrete block in the Denver Tech Center, the first domino had already fallen. Marcus was probably Googling federal custodian designation and finding nothing but bureaucratic nightmare fuel. Derek was probably still basking in his efficient restructuring. Legal was probably opening my email and feeling their blood pressure spike. And the clock was ticking. 35 hours, 47 minutes, and counting. That evening, I performed my final act as custodian. At exactly 8 p.m., I logged into the federal portal from my personal laptop using my hardware authentication token, a little USB device that looked like a flash drive, but held the cryptographic keys to Novacore's kingdom. The system recognized me immediately. Welcome, Custodian Carter. The process was surgical. First, I formally revoked my custodian status, following every federal guideline to the letter. The system asked for confirmation 3 times, each warning more dire than the last. Warning: revoking custodian status without designated replacement will trigger Federal Compliance Protocol 7. Continue. Yes. Critical warning: this action will initiate a 36-hour grace period. All federal contracts will enter provisional status. Continue. Yes. Final warning: after grace period expiration, all systems will enter lockdown. Manual federal intervention will be required for reactivation. This process typically takes 4 to 6 months. Continue. Yes. The screen flashed red, then green, then settled on an ominous amber. A countdown timer appeared in the corner, 35:59:59. I exported the confirmation logs, saved them to 3 different locations, and then did something that would have given Derek an aneurysm if he understood its significance. I physically destroyed the hardware token. Not dramatically, no hammers or fire, just a pair of pliers, bending the circuit board until it cracked. The cryptographic keys inside were now digital dust, irrecoverable. The token had been worth more than my house. It was one of only 3 ever issued for Novacore 1 for me. One backup locked in a federal facility in Virginia that required congressional subpoena to access, and one that had been accidentally destroyed in 2020 when someone put it through the washing machine. We'd never replaced it. Budget constraints, Derek's predecessor had said. I swept the pieces into a Ziploc bag and labeled it Novacore property, returned per exit protocol, with the kind of passive-aggressive precision that only comes from 12 years of corporate conditioning. My phone, which I'd turned back on, was having a seizure. 47 missed calls, 113 text messages. The last one from legal was just, "Please call immediately," in all caps. I deleted them all without reading and blocked every Novacore number I could remember. At 11:30 p.m., I opened my personal email and found what I expected: a formal letter from Novacore's legal department threatening immediate legal action if I didn't return company property and assist in the transition. I replied with a photo of the Ziploc bag containing the destroyed token and a copy of my exit paperwork, signed by Derek himself, stating that all company property had been returned and my obligations were complete. The beauty of malicious compliance is that it's still compliance. I went to bed at midnight, sleeping better than I had in years. No on-call anxiety, no 3 a.m. alerts about certificate expirations, no Sunday emergency patches, just peaceful silence while a $200 million time bomb ticked away in a server room across town. Wednesday morning, I woke at 9 a.m., decadent by my standards, made coffee with actual breakfast, not just whatever I could grab while responding to urgent tickets, checked my personal email. 17 messages from Novacore addresses that I'd apparently missed blocking. Delete, delete, delete. At 10 a.m., I drove to my favorite coffee shop in Washington Park, the one with the good Wi-Fi and the barista who knew my order, large dark roast. No room. Like my humor. I set up my laptop and pulled up the Federal Compliance Portal public access. Anyone could view contract status. Novacore Systems. Status provisional. Custodian transition. Pending time remaining 23/47/16. I smiled and opened a job search site in another tab. Not because I needed to, my savings could last 8 months, and my phone was already buzzing with LinkedIn notifications from recruiters who'd heard about my sudden availability, but because it felt normal, productive, like I was moving forward while Novacore was about to learn what backward meant. At noon, my personal phone rang. Unknown Denver number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. Emily, this is Richard Hanlon, the CEO himself, trying to sound calm and failing. There seems to be some confusion about your transition. Derek may have been hasty. We'd like to discuss bringing you back as a consultant to help with the handover. Please call me directly. Consultant. They wanted me to come back and fix their mistake as a contractor. The audacity was almost admirable. I deleted the voicemail and ordered another coffee. The countdown continued to 33:42. By 3 p.m., they'd found me. Marcus Poor. Innocent Marcus walked into the coffee shop looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 days. His polo was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands shook as he approached my table. Ms. Carter, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I really need your help. The system, it's doing things I don't understand. There are warnings everywhere, and legal is screaming about federal compliance, and Derek keeps saying it's just a technical glitch, but I know it's not. Please, can you just tell me what to do? I looked at this kid because that's what he was. A kid thrown into the deep end by a manager who couldn't tell the difference between a server and a waiter and felt something almost like pity, almost. Marcus, I said gently, what's your hourly rate? $22. And they told you that you could handle what I was doing. He nodded miserably. I was making $97,000 a year, and I was underpaid. Do you know why? He shook his head. Because what I did wasn't IT support. It was federal contract management disguised as system maintenance. And now it's going to go into lockdown in, I checked my phone, 18 hours and 27 minutes. When that happens, every government payment will stop, every contract will freeze, and NovaCore will be in breach of federal compliance. The fix requires a new custodian designation, which takes 90 days minimum, or federal intervention, which takes 4 to 6 months. The color drained from his face. Can't you just... I'm not an employee anymore, Marcus. I can't access the systems, and even if I could, the hardware token required for custodian authentication no longer exists. I followed proper exit protocols. He stared at me, understanding finally dawning. They fired the only person who could keep it running. No, I corrected, sipping my coffee. They efficiently eliminated a redundancy. Derek's words, not mine. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of beautiful Denver sunrise that mocked corporate disasters. At 6 a.m., while NovaCore's overnight team was discovering new circles of hell, I was stretching for my first stress-free jog in 12 years. No phone, no alerts, just me and the Cherry Creek Trail. By the time I got back at 7:30, the first cracks were showing. I showered, made breakfast, and opened my laptop to watch the show. The federal compliance portal was better than Netflix. NovaCore's status had shifted from amber to orange. Warning custodian authentication required in 11th to 2433. But the real entertainment was on LinkedIn. NovaCore employees were posting coded distress signals disguised as professional updates. Excited to tackle new challenges in system architecture meant everything is on fire. Learning great lessons about resilience and adaptation translated to, I'm updating my resume in real time. At 9 a.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people, a woman in a severe suit that screamed legal department and a man whose nervous energy identified him as IT senior management. I didn't open the door. Ms. Carter? I'm Patricia Gonzalez from NovaCore Legal, and this is James Liu, VP of Infrastructure. We need to speak with you urgently about the federal compliance situation. I stayed silent. They knew I was home. My car was in the driveway. James spoke up, his voice cracking. Emily, please. The Department of Defense is already asking questions. The payment processing for their quarterly audit is showing errors. If we can't authenticate by 8 p.m. tonight, we'll be in breach. Through the door, I called out, I'm no longer a NovaCore employee. Any communication should go through my attorney. You don't have an attorney, Patricia said, frustration bleeding through her professional composure. I do now, I lied, making a mental note to actually get one. They stood there for another 10 minutes, alternating between threats and pleas, before finally leaving. I watched them drive away in a black Escalade that probably cost more than my annual salary had been. By noon, the small warnings had become system-wide alerts. I pulled up Novacore's public status page, the one they showed to government clients. It was a Christmas tree of red warnings. Payment processing degraded. Authentication services. Critical. Compliance status. At risk. Data integrity, verification pending. The technical translation: the system was eating itself. Without custodian authentication, it couldn't validate its own processes. Every transaction was flagged as potentially compromised. The federal automated systems were starting to quarantine Novacore's data, treating it like a virus. At 2 p.m., Tom texted me from his personal number. "Emily, the feds just froze our DoD portal access. Derek's in Richard's office getting destroyed. Legal is threatening to sue you for sabotage." Sabotage. I texted back. I followed every exit protocol. Check the logs. I did. That's what's terrifying them. You did everything by the book. They can't prove malicious intent because there wasn't any. "Just malicious compliance," I replied. "The most beautiful kind." He sent back with a skull emoji. At 3:30 p.m., something interesting happened. The federal portal showed a new entry. Emergency custodian request filed. Pending federal review. Estimated processing time, 90 to 120 days. Expedited review requested, denied. Insufficient justification. They'd tried to jump the line and been smacked down. You don't ghost the federal government for years, ignoring their recommendations for backup custodians, and then expect special treatment when your own incompetence comes home to roost. By 5 p.m., with 3 hours left on the clock, my phone rang with a call from a number I couldn't ignore: my mother. "Emily, there's a very rude man at my door asking about you." My blood turned cold. "Mom, don't open the door. I'll handle it." I called Patricia Gonzalez directly. Her number was on the business card she'd shoved under my door. She answered on the first ring. "If anyone from Novacore contacts my family again," I said, my voice deadly calm, "I'll file for a restraining order and go to the media. Channel 9 would love a story about a Denver tech company harassing a whistleblower's elderly mother." "You're not a whistleblower," Patricia spat. "I am now," I said and hung up. At 6:45 p.m., Richard Hanlon himself called. I actually answered this one. "Emily," he said, and I could hear the defeat in his voice. "What do you want?" "Nothing," I replied honestly. "I wanted to do my job. I wanted to be respected for keeping your company alive for 12 years. I wanted Derek to understand that some things can't be optimized, streamlined, or handed to an intern, but we don't always get what we want. We'll pay you a year's salary as a consulting fee." "No. 2 years. "Richard, you still don't get it. There's nothing I can do. The token is destroyed. The federal system has locked me out as a non-employee. Even if I wanted to help and I don't, I literally cannot. You need federal intervention now." "That'll take months. We'll lose every contract." "Yes," I agreed. "You will." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he asked, "Did you plan this?" "No," I said truthfully. "I just knew that when you remove a load-bearing wall, the house falls down. Derek removed the wall. Physics did the rest." At 7:58 p.m., I watched the countdown timer hit 0. The federal portal updated with clinical precision. Novacore Systems. Status locked account. Suspended. Custodian authentication. Failure. All federal contracts. Frozen. Remediation required. Federal investigation team. Estimated resolution. 180 days. Somewhere in Denver, $200 million in government contracts had just flatlined. Not because of malice, not because of sabotage, but because one man's arrogance had collided with the immovable object of federal bureaucracy. Friday morning broke like a fever dream over Novacore Systems. I didn't need inside information to know what was happening. The local tech news had picked up the story by 6 a.m. "Denver tech giant faces federal contract crisis," read the Denver Business Journal. They'd connected the dots: massive government contracts suddenly frozen, federal compliance failure, and whispers of a catastrophic management error. Novacore's stock, which traded on the NASDAQ, opened down 12%. I made coffee and pulled up the Federal Incident Report System public record. Beautifully transparent. The damage was even worse than I'd imagined. Department of Defense $47 million in payments suspended. Department of Energy $23 million in nuclear facility management contracts under review. Veterans Affairs $38 million in healthcare systems frozen. National Security Agency, redacted contracts terminated pending investigation. General Services Administration, all future bids suspended for 180 days minimum. But the real apocalypse was in the details. Every transaction Novacor had processed in the last 72 hours was now flagged as unverified. The federal system, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that without proper custodian authentication, it couldn't trust anything. 3 days of data in limbo, 3 days of payments reversed, 3 days of trust evaporated. At 8 a.m., Tom texted, "Emergency all hands at 9. Derek's been reassigned to special projects. Translation, he's in the parking lot with a cardboard box." I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not vindication, just the hollow echo of inevitability. By 10 a.m., LinkedIn was lighting up. Novacor employees were updating their profiles en masse. Open to opportunities appeared like mushrooms after rain. Sarah from Network Security posted, "After 8 wonderful years at Novacor, I'm excited to explore new challenges." She'd already interviewed at 3 companies this week, she'd told me before I left. At 11 a.m., the lawyers arrived at my door again. This time, I recognized Patricia Gonzalez's Escalade, but she'd brought reinforcements, 3 more suits, and someone who looked like he'd stepped out of a federal agency handbook. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Ms. Carter," the federal-looking man said, showing his credentials. "Agent Timothy Walsh, Federal Contract Compliance Division. We need to discuss your role in the Novacor situation." "Am I under investigation?" I asked. "No, you're a witness. Novacor is under investigation for gross negligence in federal contract management. We've reviewed the logs. You followed proper protocols for employment termination. What we need to understand is why Novacor had a single point of failure for $200 million in federal contracts." I almost laughed. I have 12 years of documentation showing my attempts to address that exact issue. Every email, every meeting note, every denied budget request for backup custodian training. Would you like to see them? Agent Walsh's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Yes, we would." Patricia Gonzalez looked like she'd swallowed a wasp. "You can't share company communications without—" "Without what?" I interrupted. "A job. A non-disclosure agreement that specifically excludes federal investigations or the goodwill I lost when you sent someone to harass my mother." I went inside, grabbed a USB drive I'd prepared for exactly this moment, and handed it to Agent Walsh. "Every communication regarding the custodian role from 2012 to present. You'll find particularly interesting the email chain from 2019, where I explicitly warned that terminating the custodian without proper transition would result in total system lockdown." Walsh pocketed the drive. "We'll be in touch." As they left, Patricia lingered. "You've destroyed a company. 300 people will lose their jobs." "No," I corrected. "Derek destroyed a company. I just didn't stick around to cushion his landing." By 2 p.m., the dam burst completely. An emergency SEC filing revealed the scope of the disaster. Novacor was facing immediate liquidity crisis. Without federal payments, they couldn't make payroll. Without the ability to bid on new contracts for 6 months minimum, they couldn't project future revenue. Trading was halted at 2:47 p.m. with the stock down 63%. The tech blogs were having a field day. "How One Badge Killed a Billion-Dollar Company" was my favorite headline. The article included a particularly damning quote from an anonymous employee. "Everyone in IT knew Emily was the only thing keeping us compliant. Management just thought compliance was another word for overhead." At 4 p.m., Richard Hanlon did something I didn't expect. He held a press conference, looking haggard, tie askew. He stood before cameras and told the truth. Novacor Systems failed in its fundamental duty to maintain proper federal compliance protocols. This failure rests entirely with management, specifically with recent decisions to eliminate critical positions without understanding their importance. We accept full responsibility and are working with federal authorities to resolve this situation. Then he said something that made me sit up. "I want to personally apologize to Emily Carter, whose expertise and warnings we ignored. Her 12 years of dedication deserved better than the treatment she received." It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to enough, but it was something. By 6 p.m., my phone was buzzing with job offers, not requests for interviews, actual offers. Companies that understood what a federal compliance custodian was worth, companies that had watched Novacor implode and thought, we need someone who can prevent that. The numbers they were throwing around started at $150,000. One startup offered $200,000 plus equity. A government contractor in Virginia offered $220,000 plus relocation. But the most interesting call came from Agent Walsh at 7 p.m. Ms. Carter, I'm calling unofficially. The Federal Contract Compliance Division is expanding. We need someone who understands both the technical and bureaucratic sides of the system. Someone who's seen what happens when companies ignore federal requirements. Interested. A federal job, investigating companies like Novacor, making sure other employees didn't get thrown under the bus by managers who valued spreadsheets over systems. The salary was less than the private offers, but the pension was solid, and the satisfaction, priceless. Send me the details, I said. As darkness fell over Denver, Novacor's headquarters was still lit up, lawyers and executives working through the night, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. $200 million in contracts frozen, stock price in freefall, federal investigation launched, all because someone thought experience was replaceable and knowledge was redundant. Saturday morning was supposed to be quiet. I'd planned to sleep in, maybe hit the farmer's market, pretend the corporate world didn't exist for 48 hours. Instead, at 7 a.m., a Blacktown car pulled up to my house. Not a good sign. Richard Hanlon stepped out. But this wasn't the Richard from the press conference. This was a broken man. His usually perfect hair was disheveled. His $1,000 suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it if he'd slept at all. Behind him came Patricia Gonzalez and, surprisingly, Derek Vaughn. Derek looked like someone had explained quantum physics to him using only his personal bank statements. Gone was the TED Talk confidence, replaced by the hollow stare of someone who'd just learned that disruption could work both ways. I opened the door before they could knock. Coffee shop, public place, 10 minutes. They nodded like scolded children. At the coffee shop, not my usual one, I wasn't giving them that we sat at a corner table. The Saturday morning crowd provided cover, though a few people recognized Richard from yesterday's news coverage. Emily, Richard started, his voice hoarse. The federal investigator showed us your documentation, every warning, every request for backup systems, every time you tried to prevent this. I sipped my coffee and waited. Derek finally spoke, barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I thought you were just protecting your job, making yourself seem more important than I was. I finished. Derek, I wrote 16,000 lines of code to keep that system running. I memorized 700 pages of federal compliance requirements. I worked Christmas Eve 2021 when the authentication system crashed during an update. I was the only one who could fix it, and you thought I was padding my resume. His face crumbled. The board fired me an hour ago. They're suing me for gross negligence. My assets are frozen. My wife? He stopped, unable to continue. Patricia pulled out a folder. Emily, we need you to come back. Not as an employee, we know that bridge is burned. As an emergency federal compliance consultant, we'll pay whatever you want. There's nothing I can do, I said for what felt like the 100th time. The token is destroyed. I'm locked out of the system. Federal protocol requires... We know, Richard interrupted. But you could testify on our behalf. Tell the federal investigation that we're not criminally negligent, just monumentally stupid. With your testimony, we might get the suspension reduced from 6 months to 3. And save the company that threw me away like garbage. Save 300 jobs, Patricia said quietly. The janitors, the junior developers, the cafeteria staff people who had nothing to do with this decision. She was good, appealing to my conscience, making it about the innocent bystanders. But I'd spent 12 years being everyone's safety net. And where had it gotten me? My consulting rate is $1,500 an hour, I said flatly. Minimum 100-hour commitment, paid in advance, non-refundable. Derek's jaw dropped. Patricia started to object, but Richard held up his hand. Done. And I continued. Derek writes a public letter of apology, not a corporate PR piece, a real admission of what he did, published in the Denver Business Journal, TechCrunch, and LinkedIn, full page. Derek looked physically ill, but nodded. And I wasn't done. Novacor establishes the Emily Carter Fund for Women in Technology $2 million endowment, administered independently, providing scholarships for women pursuing IT careers. $2 million, Patricia gasped. We're facing bankruptcy. You're facing bankruptcy because you valued an MBA's opinion over 12 years of expertise, I shot back. $2 million. Or I walk away and let you explain to the feds why your own documentation shows willful ignorance of critical system warnings. Richard closed his eyes. Done. I stood up. I'll submit my testimony to Agent Walsh on Monday. It will be truthful that you ignored warnings but weren't intentionally malicious, just dangerously incompetent. As I turned to leave, Derek grabbed my wrist, not aggressively, desperately. Emily, I'm sorry.